You found why we are Christians. My name is Kent Philpott. I'm here in San Rafael, California, at the studios at Marin Television in San Rafael, but we're talking by Zoom to Sarah Sedgwick, and she is, where are you at, Sarah?
I'm in the UK. I'm in a place called Long Eaton, which is in the Midlands.
So you are in England.
In England, yes.
You are in
Right.
England. Wow, Sarah, this is great. And so we're glad to have you on the program. And you got to tell us a little bit about who you are. Where were you born?
I was born on the south coast of England in a town called Bournemouth. So it's a very popular holiday seaside resort in the UK.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about your family?
My family, so I was born into a Christian family. I had one older brother and one older sister. And we grew up originally in Bournemouth, but when I was about 4.5, they moved to Kent, which is another beautiful part of the south coast of England.
Okay.
So yeah, it was. My mum was a primary school teacher. My dad was originally a kind of salesman, but then he moved up and became manager of a business. So he's very much an engineer and a businessman. And they were both quite heavily involved in the church. When we moved to Kent, my mum was quite heavily involved in the children's ministry because of her teacher background, and Dad initially was a deacon and then an elder in the church. So they were quite actively involved in that as well.
Was that the Church of England?
No, it was an evangelical free church.
Evangelical
so I come
free?
From a free church background, yes.
Okay. All right. And so you're the youngest of three.
That's right.
And you went to school in England, and did you do any sports or anything like that, Sarah?
I did, yes. I was very involved in sports as a child. So in England, we have schools which are church affiliated. So the Church of England has what they call Church of England schools. So I went to St James, which was a lovely school, and there I found my love of sport. And I played at a young age quite a lot of sports. And then as I got older, I got very involved in what you would call field hockey. We called it just hockey over here. I used to play soccer, netball. I'm not sure whether you have netball much over in the States, and cricket. So I played quite a few different sports. And I was very into athletics as well. So I threw the javelin quite a reasonable level as well.
Okay. All right, Sarah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so what did you like going to school? Was there a favorite subject you had?
I did like going to school. Probably the main reason I liked going to school was to get away from home, which sounds quite sad, but it was my kind of safe space school. And in terms of favorite subject, I mean, PE was always top of the list for me, and it was the thing that kept me going. But on top of that, I really did enjoy maths, which was something that, as a youngster, I was quite good at it. So yeah, maths as well.
Okay. After you graduated, what we would say graduated from high school, did you go to school any further?
Yeah. So in the UK at 18, you go to university. And I went to Nottingham, so from the south coast up to the Midlands, and I studied sports science and administration. So I did a degree, so a 3-year degree in that, and then later on, about 5 or 6 years later, having been in the workplace, I did a master's degree in sociology of sport and sports management. So that was the area of work I went into, and that's the education field I followed.
Okay. So tell us what was it like in your teenage years? What was going on with you, Sarah, in your teen years?
What was going on with me? Okay, so if I give you a little bit of background from family, so at home, it was, whilst my parents went to church, it was quite a dysfunctional family. My dad was quite an aggressive and very angry man. So as children, we lived in quite a lot of fear. We trod on eggshells around him in the household. And so it was a difficult time as a teenager. So I kind of had a great fear for my dad. Myself, my brother, and my sister, looking back, all dealt with that in different ways. And for me, I buried myself very much in sport. And so I started playing sport for adult clubs. And I think that was probably the stage where I first started feeling attraction towards other women. In adult sports clubs, and we're talking about the 1980s, so homosexuality wasn't as accepted as it is today, and it wasn't as, you know, obvious. But that was the first place I started seeing female couples who were very much open about their relationships. And that was when I started feeling those sort of attractions myself. So it was a difficult time because it wasn't, I didn't know anybody in my school who had the same attractions as I had. I didn't know really anybody apart from those older people. So there was a lot of confusion going on for me.
But how old were you when you started to wrestle with the same-sex attraction? But how old?
I would say probably 14.
14?
Probably about 14, yes, when I started really getting actively involved in these sort of adult clubs.
When you look back on it, maybe years later, did you ever have an idea of how that same-sex attraction developed?
I think for me, it was I had a very obvious fear of men. I remember almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, screaming at my dad saying, I will never get married. I will never get married if this is what marriage is about. And so I saw female couples as being very safe, being very loving, and it being a very, a safe environment. And so I think that was probably what I was most attracted to. And it was almost the fear of men that put me into that. So it's difficult to say. I probably did have some attraction anyway, but that made it a lot more the path that I chose to follow.
Did other people, family members, know this was going on with you?
No, not at all. I think when I eventually came out to my older sister, she said that I've known for quite some time, but she never let on that she knew at the time. So that was quite a shock to me. Looking back now, it shouldn't have been a shock because of the way I was dressing and the friends I had. But yeah, they as far as I was aware, they didn't know.
Okay. Now, did you experience any conflict, let's say, with the church that you were going to? Were you still going to church as a teenager?
I was still going to church at that stage, and I think for me, I was, to start with, I wasn't really feeling any conflict, but then I started thinking more about it as I was becoming more open with myself that this was happening. And I would look things up. In those days, it wasn't Google, it was, you know, my parents' Bible concordance and different books that I could see and sort of refer to the Bible verses that spoke about it. And I think the one for me that stood out was the Leviticus one, which talks about it being an abomination. And I kind of took that on board. I heard some things from the pulpit, which very much were about hell and damnation. And I also overheard a conversation of my parents who were talking to a local church member who actually rang the local paper, and an advert had gone in about a gay nightclub, and they were incandescent with rage about the fact that his paper had put this advert in. And I remember overhearing the telephone conversation and thinking, wow, this is incredibly bad, you know, the way people were reacting. So, you know, hence the secrecy and the silence. But having said that, whilst I've been going to church, I'd never developed a relationship with the Lord. So it was almost like a religion rather than a faith. So for me, I think had I established a relationship with the Lord, it would have been more of a conflict for me. But as it was almost easy to say, well, I'll leave the church and walk away, because I didn't know Jesus at that point.
Okay. Thanks for saying that. I was just going to ask you about that, that very thing, the conflict. So I'm thinking it's pretty clear that at that stage, the teen stage, you really hadn't been born again.
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm.
So did you have lovers during that period, or someplace after?
Not until I went to university. So until I was 18, I hadn't. And then when I moved to university, and obviously you move away from home and everybody's in that sort of different environment, and that's when I first started going to gay clubs, met my first girlfriend, and started being, much more sort of open about who I was.
And what were people's reaction?
At university, it was interesting because you had to still be very careful. So again, it was very secretive to start with. The first girlfriend I had, it was very much sneaking around, even amongst other students. It was, climbing out a bedroom window sometimes at night so that the rest of the housemates wouldn't see you, which is quite laughable now. But it was, so it wasn't well received in a lot of places.
Okay. Did you run into trouble with any of your friends you were going to school with? Did you get, or was the community very open and accepting?
Well, when I left my school, actually it coincided with the time that my parents moved to a totally different part of the country. So when I went home in the holidays, I didn't have the old friend base that I had, so I was very much on my own. But within sort of university, it was, I just had a very small, close group of friends, mainly people I played sport with, and they were very accepting. Outside of that, walking down the street with a girlfriend, not even holding hands, but probably looking very much like we were a lesbian couple, you would get people shouting abuse or name calling, etc. So yes, it was still in that stage where people were very anti anybody, walking down, looking that way.
Okay. So you had, I think, an idea that you were moving against what the church said and what the scripture said. You had an idea of that?
Yes, I did. I in the back of my mind, I knew that was not what the Bible taught, and I knew it wasn't the right thing in the eyes of the church. But the pull for me, as I said earlier, because I didn't have that personal relationship with the Lord, the pull for me was very much to the worldly view.
Okay.
And trying just to not justify it to God, but actually just ignore him, act as if he wasn't there, act as if it hadn't been said.
Okay. All right. So you didn't experience a lot of discrimination against you?
Not really, no. I mean, just as I say, just from strangers, but not from my close-knit circle. I suppose I was quite cautious about who I told. So there was still a lot of secrecy. So even going home in the holidays, etc., I wouldn't tell. I didn't come out to my parents until I was in my 20s.
Okay. So now, at what point do you think you became an actual born again Christian, Sarah? How did that develop? So you're into the gay culture, living the gay life. How in the world did you get involved with Christians?
Very much a God thing. I wasn't looking to give my life to the Lord. I mean, I wasn't even thinking about it. I was in a civil partnership. I'd been in a civil partnership for 16 years. I'd say happy as you can be, but I wasn't looking for the Lord. And it was just by coincidence, well, wasn't coincidence, God incidents one day. I came home from work and I just retuned my radio. And in retuning the radio, it came across a station that I didn't even know existed, which was a Christian radio station. And a song was playing, and it was a song that I remembered from when I was a child, from church. So I listened to the end of it. And at the end of it, it went into a teaching series, and it was Joyce Meyer. And I started listening to her, and within 2 or 3 minutes, I was hooked. I liked her style. I liked how she was speaking, and I was listening to her. And at the end of that day, it said, you know, this series is on for the next 2 weeks. So I got home from work, tuned the radio to that station, and I listened. And over that 2-week period, I think the key thing I was hearing was that God loved everybody. And I think for a long time, I'd gone through that stage of God doesn't love me or couldn't love me. So by the end of the 2 weeks, I wasn't just listening to that series, I was listening on into the end of the day and hearing a lot of different preaching, a lot of worship. And I was beginning to really sort of connect and have the odd conversation with God and talk to him. And over a period of time that developed. So, you know, I was praying, I would have just said, you know, sort of talking to him at that stage. And then he clearly said to me, I want you to go to church. And that was a real key point for me, because I was like, no, God, I'm not going to church because I won't be welcome. They don't like gay people. You know, I'll be rejected. And I was very fearful about going to church. And I rejected that thought. And for a couple of, probably the next 2 or 3 weeks, nearly every time I turned on the radio, there was some kind of person talking about the importance of community or fellowship or being in a church environment. And in the end, I said, okay, God, you've got me. I'll go to church. So I went to church, and God showed me the church to go to. And it was a very loving church. Nobody confronted me at all, which was my fear.
Did they know you were? Did they know you were gay?
I didn't tell them I was gay, but quite clearly by the way I dressed and my hairstyle, etc. And they've told me since that yes, they clearly realised that I was gay.
Okay.
But they were very supportive, and they gave me space. And as I had that space, I could see people who were filled with the Spirit. I could see people who were living lives full of joy and peace. And it was something I really wanted. But all through that period, I was going home from work, getting out my laptop and Googling, can I be a gay Christian? Because I was getting to the stage where I thought I really want to be a Christian. I didn't want to give up what I had. And that was a real battle for me, because when you Google something like that, you get every end of the spectrum from, yes, you can be, right the way through to, no, you're going to hell, and every answer in between. But I never talked to the Lord about it. And then in February 2015, I've been going to church about 6 months. And the preacher stood up and he said at the end of his sermon, you know, you need to open every door of your heart to Jesus. And I was immediately convicted that this one door in my heart I had never opened, and I'd never had that conversation. So I didn't go up for the altar call, but I went home and I mulled over it, and I thought I need to talk to God. And so I did. I talked to God about it, and he just really gently and lovingly showed me what his will for me would be, and what his best, how he created us, and that his best was for me not to be in this lifestyle. So I didn't give my life to the Lord immediately. I went downstairs and I had a long chat with my ex-partner, and I explained to her that.
So you were living together with somebody at this time?
Yep, yeah, we'd been together 16 years.
16 years?
16
wow.
years, yeah. So I said to her I want to become a Christian, and she wasn't too impressed. She was an atheist. She was not that impressed at that. And then I explained what that meant in terms of, you know, not having the relationship we had. That was an incredibly difficult conversation, obviously, but once we'd had that conversation and the sort of the fallout from that, I then went upstairs and I gave my life to the Lord. And it was incredible in terms of a weight just lifted immediately from me the moment I made that decision.
How old were you then, Sarah?
I was 48.
48?
Yes,
wow.
Yeah. So I'd been walking apart from the Lord for over 30 years.
Yes. I remember the 30 years. I remember reading your book about, and I remember the 30 years. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It was a long time that I'd not been into. I'd only been into churches maybe occasionally with my mum when I went home, or for a wedding. But I hadn't been anywhere near them.
So now, did the pastor of the church, people in the church, find out about this? I mean, what had happened to you?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because I told a couple of people fairly quickly who were very, very supportive. But it was in the October, so what's that, about 8 months later, that I was baptized. And as part of the baptism, we gave our testimony. Everybody was baptized, and it was a funny day because it was mainly teenagers being baptized that day. There was only 2 adults. And so all the teenagers went up and gave a kind of standard teenage testimony of, you know, how they've been brought up in the faith and they've given their lives to the Lord. And I was quaking in my boots as I had to go up to the front. And I told the pastor I'm going to share. And he said, that's fine. And I shared I was up there about 20 minutes and I just poured out my heart and said what had happened.
Wow.
And at
Sarah.
the end, yeah, it was terrifying.
Was this an evangelical free church again? Or
no, this was a Methodist church.
A Methodist church, that's right. I forgot Methodist, you're right.
Yes, it was a Methodist church in the UK. So at the end of the service, everybody who'd been baptized lined up at the back and people were coming up. And that was, for me, the first time I realized that this was a really difficult topic within the church. And it was very divisive because some people were avoiding me and not saying anything to me. And then I had some lovely comments, but I had 2 individuals came up to me and said, God didn't expect you to give up the girlfriend. You know, it's a lovely testimony, but God didn't expect you to do that. And I just came crashing down from this high of, you know, of being baptized and sharing my story. And then suddenly I realized that this was very divisive and people weren't very happy.
Yeah. Yeah, you're going to get mixed reactions in a lot of churches today. It's always up in the air. So then, what happened with your partner? What did she do?
Okay, so God's been really gracious with that friendship. Initially, we stayed together within the same household, and it was God was very gracious with me in terms of the steps that it took. So he kind of led me all the way, you know, moving into the spare room, removing the wedding ring, and then sort of working on the emotional codependency that we had. So because we were financially dependent at that stage, we house shared. Now for a couple of years that was quite difficult, but over time it got easier. But now, again, by God's grace, I've been able to buy her out of the house, and she has her own home about 150 miles away. We still talk, we're still friends, and she's really exploring faith now. Where she's moved to, she's speaking to somebody about joining a church. So again, that is God's grace that, you know, He's been working in her life as well.
Okay. What about your parents and your siblings? Did they?
Yes.
What happened with them?
Well, my dad backslid quite seriously when I was a teenager, and he left church, and he wasn't going to church at the time when I became a Christian. So he was very really not really bothered either way about the decision I'd made, but I think that was because he was walking in sexual sin himself at that stage. So I think he found it hard for the fact that I'd come out of that. And unfortunately, he died about 3 years ago. My mum, she was pleased, but what had happened with my mum was that she had become a little bit affected by the liberal Christians, because I think she thought there was a hope for me. So she was a little bit, you know, well, I'm not sure where I stand on it, but now, yeah, she's fully behind me. And my sister has been absolutely amazing. She's a Christian, and you know, we have amazing conversations. She's been wonderful.
Okay, well that's good. That's very nice, Sarah. So, but what were you doing work-wise right now? at that point?
Right now?
No.
Okay, so
then, at that point.
Then, at that point, I had two businesses. So I had a sandwich shop, which I was running, and I also was setting up an internet-based business. So that was, my sandwich shop was almost my day job, and then in the evenings I was working on an internet-based website business.
Okay, all right. So now, here you go. Now you're an actual real Christian at this point. You're looking at your life, and you from some period you guys are still together. Your partner, you guys are still together. Bring us a little bit farther now after that.
So where I am, to where I got to today, over a period of time, and it was quite quickly after I became a Christian, I really felt God encouraging me to write my story down and to really write down how I had made the decisions I'd made and why I'd made them. So over a period of about 6 months, I actually wrote a book which followed my journey somewhat, but also looked at the scriptures and the scriptural basis for my decision. And from that, I got I felt a real calling on me to start talking within churches and offering to give my testimony. And God's really used that, the circumstances within the Methodist Church in Great Britain. So I'm not sure how aware you are, but recently they had a big debate on same-sex marriage. And there was a consultation period leading up to that. And I was able to add my voice to that. And I was invited to speak in certain places. And from that, God really spoke to me about setting up my own ministry. So from that period to today, I got to the stage where I sold both the businesses and set up Transform Ministries, which is now been up and running since November 2019. And that's now my job. And that's supporting churches and supporting individuals to deal with issues of faith and sexuality.
Now, just quickly, Sarah, I hope you don't mind me asking this question. It's a tough question. I've been sitting here debating whether I was going to ask it, but did your same-sex attraction go away?
My same-sex attraction has diminished a lot, and I would say now I am more attracted to men than I am to women. But God's walked with me to help me manage that. And I think that's the really important thing for me, is that throughout the whole thing, He's shown me almost like what holy sexuality looks like, and that my desires have never been to reach that sort of goal of heterosexuality, but to reach the goal of being holy and being honouring to God. So He's really walked with me through it. So I would say, 90% yes, and I manage. It's not something that I even really think about anymore, because God walks with me through that.
Now, we've just got about 20 seconds left, Sarah, on this first program. We're going to be back, by the way, with another program. And we're going to look at what happened. I want to talk about your book. I want to talk about your book, yes. Sarah. All right. Yeah. So very good. Sarah, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. Be looking for the next program with Sarah Sedgwick coming up. So long.